Welcome back to After Effects. In Chapter 5 in our book, we're going to pick up where we left off. If you have the book, that's at the bottom of page 209. What we last did, I mentioned right before I stopped that video, is that you can see how there's a bounding box around this, and you can see this light outside ring. We don't see the top of it. I'm going to zoom in just to show you because I know it's hard to see. This should be a little bit better view. Do you see how this top circle comes to this bounding box and then we don't see it up here, and then eventually we hit our bounding box and we see that circle again. So that's a problem that we want to deal with. So where are all those separate layers that we made in Illustrator? Remember we brought this in as a flattened image, but now what we're going to do is we're going to tell Illustrator to replace this merged layers footage item with a layered composition. So a couple of things before we move on. I want you to notice down in your timeline, poolside L3 background Illustrator file is the name of this, and that's something that we brought in. That's how it's named right now. And similarly up in our project panel, it's named poolside L3 _ BG for background. We are going to swap this out. So in the project panel up here, we're going to select the poolside.ai footage item, and we're going to choose File, Replace Footage with a Layered Comp. We brought it in flattened or merged. We're going to do it now, replace it with the layered version. So once we do that, we need to see that a few things changed. We don't see the Illustrator thing here anymore. We now see a composition called poolside L3 BG, and we see it named differently down here. Here's that same composition down in our timeline. What we also see up in our project panel is besides this composition, we now have a subfolder, and if we twirl this one open, the one called poolside background layers, we see this is the Illustrator file with all the individual layers that we built in that lower third graphic. So these are the original layers that you made. All right, I'm going to twirl that shut. And then down here in our timeline, notice that we have our lower third template. This is what we were working on, and our icon has changed here as well. We now have this composition rather than the AI. So a layer can be an imported footage item, and it can also be another composition completely. So if you create an animation with several layers in one composition and then put that composition into a second one, the layers of the first will become flattened into one layer in the second composition. This is called nesting. It's going to make more sense as we work on this. So nesting compositions in After Effects is a way to group multiple layers, much like we create folders in Photoshop, a folder of layers. We're going to double click on the poolside L3 BG composition, and we can double click on it in either place, but it's going to open its own tab down here. So this is a nested composition. The composition consists of all of these different layers, and these should look familiar to you because they are named and stacked just as you built them in Illustrator, with the background and then ripples 1 through 5. What we're going to do now is we're going to animate this background. We're going to apply scaling and opacity to these different ripples. First thing we're going to do down in our timeline layers panel is we're going to lock the background layer. So we're going to click on the little lock icon right here, so that nothing happens. We don't accidentally bump around that. Then we're going to do a Command or Control A to select all of the other layers that are not locked. So ripple 1 through 5. We want to show the scaling properties on these. So with them all selected, if we press the letter S, that's going to open up the scaling property for all of them. Because we open this, your timeline playhead should be at 0. It should be at the start, but just confirm that that's where it is before we do this next step. We are going to click on the stopwatch for any one of these in the scale, and that's going to activate the scaling for all of them. And right now they're scaled at 100% because that's how we built it. at this first frame. We are going to change them. We're going to click on the first scaling and we're going to choose 75% and hit tab. Because those are locked, it's going to change both of them, and because all 5 ripples are selected, it's going to change them all down to 75%. So when this animation starts, they are at 75% of their original size that we built them at. When it ends, way over here at the end of our timeline, we're going to have them be much bigger. So the quick way to get your playhead to the end is Command Option right arrow. Oops, gotta be down here in the timeline though. Command Option right arrow, or drag your playhead to the end. And when it gets to this point, you can see that it's still at 75%. We actually want to scale these all to 210. So 210, hit tab, and that's going to make all of them go to 210%. So as we scrub through this, these little circles or ripples start at 75% of their original size, and as we scrub through, they are animated up to 210% of their size. All the in-between keyframes are made for us. One thing that you're probably noticing, however, is that it looks terrible, right? It looks pixelated. And since this is from Illustrator, vector graphics, we would not expect this. It seems weird. By default, After Effects is going to treat imported vector graphics as raster objects. So in order to take advantage of this resolution independent nature of the vector graphics, we have to turn on an option called continuous rasterization. So I want you to go back down to your layers area of the timeline. And at the bottom, there's a thing that says toggle switches and modes. If your interface doesn't look like mine, it probably is just this toggle. This is what mine looked like when we were doing the Pickwick and we were doing nulls and parents. I was in this view, but if you click on this mode button right down here, it'll also show you this view. In this view, we have a lot of little icons at the top. We have Shy, hides a layer in a timeline. We have what looks like a sunshine, some dotted lines, FX, something that looks like a frame, a bouncing ball, a contrast, a 3D. All these different things have different meanings depending on what we're doing. So this one, you can see for a comp layer, it will collapse transformations. For a vector layer, it will continuously rasterize it. That's what we want it to do. These are vector layers. So we're going to click on this sunshine box in Ripple 1, and because all of them were highlighted, this sunshine lights up for everything. If you go back in your composition panel, it should look much improved. The edges should be smooth again. So from here, this is nested. Poolside L3 background is nested inside of our lower third template. So let's click back to that. Here's our lower third template. You can see here's that nested composition that we just did. And now if we take our playhead here, we're going to see that indeed that poolside background composition is animating. The one thing that we still have a problem with, as we see it getting larger and larger, it still looks a little pixelated, but it fixes at the end, and it is still not showing beyond the boundaries of this box. So what we need to do is we need to stop this cropping from happening. And let's notice that our nested composition, I got to toggle switch again because I'm not in the view that I want. I want to switch this so that I see all these little icons. If you notice, the ones above it have the sunshine layer turned on, but our new nested composition doesn't. It has that same switch for continuous rasterization. However, because this is a nested composition, this has a little bit different meaning, and it's called collapse transformations. And when this is activated in a nested composition, any layers that normally were cropped are now fully visible. So I'm going to pull this ahead so you can see the difference. And as it gets bigger and bigger, I'm losing the top of this circle here because of the crop box. Now I'm going to turn on this feature over here, and notice that it now extends outside of my crop box, or the crop box actually grows with it. So we're not getting, or the bounding box rather. So by turning that on for the entire nested composition, all the layers are fully visible. All right. We are going to go back to the composition right here, the poolside background composition. We're going to click on that tab to open it. We've animated so far the scale of things. What we're going to do now is we're going to animate the opacity of these different layers. Our playhead should still be at the end, so Command Option right arrow or pull your playhead all the way to the end. We're going to do this one in reverse. Doesn't matter where we start with our keyframes. It's just the first one is at a certain condition or opacity, and the next one you make is at a different opacity, and it will do the animating. So we already have scale showing. We now want to add the opacity option to it. So T is the keyboard shortcut for opacity. But if we want to keep our scale showing, we need to add Shift when we add the letter T. So Shift T twirls open the opacity option. And you can see right now the playhead is at the end and they are all at 100% opacity. That's the default behavior. At the end, we want them all to be at 20% opacity. So click any one of these and hit Tab. And again, because all 5 were highlighted, all 5 changed to 20% opacity. And you can see that up here in your composition window as well. Then we're going to bring our playhead all the way back to the beginning. And where we want it to start is not at 20% opacity. We want them to start at 50%. So with your playhead at the start, you can either drag it or Option Command left arrow. We're going to do 50% opacity here. So all 5 of them start at 50%, and as time goes on, they fade out down to 20% opacity. They're also getting bigger, so it's a little bit harder to see that. Oh, you know what? I lied. What I did wrong was I didn't click the stopwatch to place that first one down. So we can go the other direction. We're saying at the starting point, it needs to be at 50%. In order to make your first keyframe, what I forgot to do was click on the stopwatch. Okay, see how that made that keyframe here at 50%? So now I need to take my playhead to the end. And now that I already have the stopwatch activated, when I change the opacity down to 20% for the end, it will automatically put in that second keyframe. So I hope by me making that mistake, you got a little refresher in what you do. When you set your first condition, you have to activate the stopwatch. Then when you go to a new position, it'll automatically add a keyframe for you. So now we're going from 50% opacity down to 20% opacity as they get larger, as we scrub through this. All right, to get some variation, we're going to click to deselect all of these. So I'm just going to click down here in the gray area where nothing is selected. If you don't have any dead area, Command Shift A will deselect all your layers. And we're just going to add some variation to these one at a time. So ripple number 1, I'm going to choose that. And for ripple number 1, I'm going to change the opacity for this one. And we're going to change, let's see, 50%. We're going to start this one at 25%. Notice that's a lot lighter over here. And then ripple number 5, we're going to start this one at 100%. So you can see that this one is brighter. So now by scrubbing through our playhead, we have some different options. One gets brighter, one gets darker, and the other 3 are on that first setting that we applied. If you want to see a RAM preview of this, so rather than scrubbing through here, remember we can't do that in well, the only way we can do it in After Effects to see a rendered preview is using the RAM preview. So if you have a numeric keypad, you can press 0, which is what I just did, and you're seeing now the RAM preview of it. If you don't have a number keypad on your keyboard, Control 0, or you can go over to your preview menu over here and click play. So I'm going to click stop now. We want to verify that these changes were made on our nested composition. So we're in that little sub-composition right now. Everything looks great. But what we want to do is go back to our lower third template. And this nested composition that we were just working on, we want to make sure it looks right. So we're going to just pull our playhead through here. Sure enough, the circles get bigger and they come in various degrees of opacity. So that is our first After Effects animation that we wanted to accomplish. So I'm going to stop this video here, and our next video is going to be animating this text.